Okay, Chem 1 students, we're going to talk about how to do a pre-lab report. You're going to be doing this very soon for your first lab, so it's important that you know exactly how to do this because we will be grading these um, as you are doing your lab. So listen carefully and make sure that you follow the instructions that we give you here. So you should have your lab report format sheet in front of you to make notes as you follow along, and I'm going to give you certain reminders that are especially important and try to clarify some things so hopefully you'll know exactly what you're doing. So what you're looking at here, this is the report format sheet. I'm going to go scroll down to the very bottom where it talks about guidelines and helpful hints. Point out some things to you that you really need to make sure that you pay attention to. For example, you will be judged on the appearance of your work for the rest of your life. You might as well start to practice that now. So make your lab reports neat. Make sure that the lab reports are always done in ink, and we highly recommend that you use word processing if you have that available. That works especially well for designing your data tables. If you have any questions about how to do that, how to design that, come in and see us and we'll be happy to go over that with you. The only thing that you're allowed to do in pencil are calculations and for doing the construction of your best fit line and your data points as we have discussed previously. Please note that you will be marked off. You will be marked off if you are sloppy. So please keep that in mind. Do not copy your lab partner or someone else's lab reports. Um, if they are done and they are exactly the same, we will be happy to split the points between you. So we understand that you do your work together sometimes, but do not make your reports identical or you will be marked off for that. You must be writing your own lab procedure. Remember not to use abbreviations. We do not use abbreviations in technical writing. The only thing that you are allowed to abbreviate are appropriate abbreviations for SI units and for symbols and formulas that you will use to represent elements and compounds. Those are the only things. You always want to make sure that you have a completed pre-lab when you come to class. You aren't to come in and finish writing the lab in class or complete the data table while you are doing the lab. You don't come in expecting to print off the lab at the beginning of class. You need to have it in hand, ready to go before the class begins. It is acceptable for you to come in sufficiently early to have your teacher look at the pre-lab and then to fix it and print it before class starts. Make sure that you have allowed plenty of time to do that. All right, with those helpful guidelines in mind, let's move back up to the beginning and talk about the format for doing, okay, this is fun. Thank you. The format for doing your report. I'm having a whole lot of fun with this. I'm not sure why it's doing that, but it is. Okay. So the first thing that you're going to want to have as part of your lab report is the title. The idea for the title is that it it isn't very long, but it appropriately describes what you're doing in the lab. For example, if you look at the sample title that we've given you here, determination of percent yield of hydrogen gas, you read that title, you can tell what is being done in that experiment. That They're trying to determine the percent yield of hydrogen gas. A title such as Fun with Hydrogen may be amusing, but it's not appropriate for a title for your report. Again, I want to remind you, your lab report needs to be either done in ink or to be typewritten. Now, after the title, which is going to be at the very top of your report, probably even above your name, then the first section of the report is the purpose section. The purpose section is designed to tell the reader, your teacher, exactly what you're attempting to determine, the reason for doing the experiment. In general, this purpose should include three things. Number one, what you're trying to do. What is it that you're trying to determine by doing this experiment? Second, how you will be determining that. And three, what you will use. What you are using to do the experiment. If you read the purpose here, the purpose of this lab is to determine the percent yield of hydrogen gas. So that tells you what we're trying to do. We're trying to determine the percent yield of hydrogen. How? By decomposing. And what are we using? Water. 2.50 grams of water. So we're using 2.50 grams of water, decomposing that water to produce hydrogen and oxygen, and then using that to determine the percent yield. That's what you want to get across when you are describing your purpose. Don't use words like understand or get a feel for or things like that. There's a specific goal or purpose that you are trying to accomplish. After the purpose, you're going to include a material and method section. This is a step-by-step description of the procedure. Step-by-step description of the procedure. Please do that in outline form. Step number 1, we are going to do this. Step number 2, we are going to do this, and so on. This needs to be very specific. Someone should be able to read your procedure and do exactly what you did the way that you did it. Suppose, for example, that you were writing a procedure explaining how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Peanut butter and jelly. It's peanut butter jelly time, peanut butter. So anyway, you're trying to describe how you would make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So you write step number 1. Put the peanut butter on the bread. So someone who had never done this before, had no idea how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, would take the jar of peanut butter and put it on the loaf of bread. They put the peanut butter on the bread. Now, compare that to doing something like take out a jar of peanut butter and a loaf of bread. Remove 2 slices of bread from the loaf package and lay flat on a table. Open the jar of peanut butter. Using a butter knife, remove approximately 2 tablespoons of peanut butter and spread evenly over 1 slice of the bread. You can see that that is a much more detailed and descriptive explanation of what you're going to do. So when you're writing your procedure, don't put the peanut butter on the bread. Make sure that there is sufficient detail to describe your procedure so that it could be repeated by someone who had no idea how to do the experiment. Also, keep in mind that you may want to write a separate list of equipment and materials Your teacher may require you to include that or not. Whether you are required to include this equipment and materials list, you must always describe in the steps of the procedure any equipment that you will be using and the materials that will be involved as well. Notice, for example, it says to use a balance to mass the 2.5 grams of water. So we're using water as materials, we're using a balance as our equipment in order to mass that 2.50 grams. Make sure that you always include any equipment, the size of the equipment that you're using if appropriate, any chemicals that you are using, specific concentrations if that's appropriate. Always make sure that you're including sufficient detail. As the final part of your pre-lab write-up, you are going to include the results section. I will tell you now that the most common point lost on a pre-lab grade is the failure to title this section. Please don't go directly from the materials and methods section to data table. The data table that you include is a part of the results section. You see, the results section is actually divided into two subsections, the data section and the analysis section. The data section is what you do as part of your pre-lab. The data section will contain any tables that you are going to use to collect data for your lab. Remember, this must be done ahead of time. Do not come to class thinking I'm going to make my data table while we're doing the lab. You will not be permitted to do the lab if your data table is not complete when you come to class. Remember all of the appropriate things we have discussed about making a data table. Having appropriate headings for each measurement, including units, or an identifying heading for a substance or for any type of qualitative observations that you are going to make. Make sure that your data table is made either on Word or some type of word processing program, or that you use a straight edge to make all lines. Also, make sure that you have made your table in ink, and make sure that there is an appropriate title. Be specific. Don't just say materials used for experiment or data table or quantitative data table. See how the title that we have used here, masses of water and hydrogen, indicates specifically that these are the substances that we're measuring, and this is what we are measuring for that substance. The answer to the question, what do I include in my data table, is any observation or measurement that you are going to be making as part of your experiment. That is what you will need in order to begin the lab. This is everything that is necessary for the pre-lab. In our next recording, we will talk about the post-lab, analyzing the data that you collect in terms of calculations and graphs, and then writing your post-lab conclusion. That's all for now. Make sure that you follow these instructions so that you get a perfect score on your pre-lab.